I'd like to ask Lisa Mallner up here. She is one of the people that makes all this organization happen, and she's got a panel of people that she's going to introduce to you.
Oh, sure.
Right,
yes.
sure. Or I can say, I can say it's Kim, Carla, and Neil. And for those of you that work in this community, you should know them already. But if you don't,
I'm happy
you're
to
going
introduce
say
them.
a couple extra words.
I'll start with myself. Hi, I'm Lisa. I'm here from Nordic.AI, and we support the AI ecosystem in the Nordic region. And I'm really happy to introduce my panel. Please welcome Carla Fabbro from the Bash. Thank you. Kim Balle from Global Startup Awards. And last but not least, Neil Murray from Nordic Web Ventures. So today's panel, I'll find a seat. We are talking about why community building is important at a Nordic level and how we can use Nordic cross-collaboration to really expand the ecosystem and have a bigger impact globally. So I'm just going to start with the obvious question. What's the point of collaborating at a Nordic level? We're small countries. Why do we not focus on collaborating with other countries that maybe could give us more global impact? Kim.
I think when doing the work with Global Startup Awards, we are traveling a lot to ecosystems around the world. We're going to Asia, to Africa, to other parts of Europe. And the further away from Denmark you come, the more they will perceive this as one place. So if you say that you're from the Nordic, you already have good points in the book because it's actually a very strong and trustworthy brand. So I think that's why it's good to also learn how to collaborate so we can tell each other stories. So just the fact that you know something about the region as a whole can be very good selling points when you talk to, let's say, investors that doesn't know so much about the Nordic. But if you can kind of sell your region as a whole, it will have more impact compared to if you're only selling Denmark, for example.
So I want to dig into what you said. You said the Nordics are a brand globally. So they're a strong brand, right? So when we think about Nordics, we think of high-trust countries. We think about countries that have low corruption. We might even think about countries that have good education and a really good access towards tech talent. So does that help us with collaboration cross borders, or is that something that actually makes things move slower?
Yeah, I think it does help. I think that there's an identity that everyone in the Nordics can relate to in the individual countries. So, and I would say that those are very fundamental building blocks for why people can identify in that way. We all have a similar safety net, good education. Those fundamental blocks are there that we can all relate to. We've all benefited from. So for sure, I think that that is something that unifies at least a mindset and an approach.
All right, now for the elephant in the room. I'm from the US. Carla, you're from France.
Yes.
Kim, you're the only one from the Nordics, because Neil, you're from the UK. So everyone here that's doing community building, the majority are foreigners. I also see people in the audience that do community building that are not originally from the Nordic countries. And there seems to be an impression that the people that are doing this work are not from the Nordics. Why is that?
Yeah, we were talking about it backstage. If you actually look at the people not only here, but in the other Nordic regions, or in the other Nordic countries, sorry. In Norway, we have Sean Percival from the US, Tyler Crowley in Sweden. Here we have the amazing Neil. So I think that's a global thing. It's not just here. Yeah, I think that we maybe see an opportunity that people locally don't see. And obviously, if we're here, it's because we want to take part in building something bigger and improve the ecosystem.
And I think there's different layers of why this is the reason. I think there's also like a very practical reason for this, because it's an amazing way as a foreigner to meet cool people. And there is, no matter where you go around the world, there's always like these common values in the ecosystems. And it's always, inviting and open, and you're always a good way to meet friends. So that's a very practical reason why I think that's also the case.
And I think the law of Janti is kind of ingrained in a lot of people who were brought up here, but I don't have that same thing in my psyche. So the law of Janti, to me, I don't really give a shit about, because it's not something that I've grown up worrying about. So I'm kind of able to be, say, outspoken or say, hey, I think these people did a great job, and kind of push people forward in that respect. And I think that's also what Sean and Tyler have done as well. They've kind of been the spokesperson for, hey, look what great stuff is happening in this community. because of course people within that community who existing members may feel a little kind of, they don't want to stick out or be that person who says, hey, look at this is pretty good. But if you're an outsider, you have that ability to do that without having perhaps the same worry about standing out, because you already stand out because you're an outsider. And I think the other thing for me, operating on a Nordic level, one of the reasons why I've been able to be Nordic and accepted as Nordic, despite living in Copenhagen, despite my family now being Danish, is that I did come from the outside, so people still feel like, well, he's kind of Danish, but he doesn't have that same attachment to the individual country, so he's not just looking out for the interests of Denmark, but rather looking at it from a Nordic perspective. So I think that that's something that's helped me as well.
So what would you say is essentially the Nordic perspective that's helping to bridge this gap towards foreigners looking from the outside in?
In terms of?
In terms of, is there something that you're seeing as a foreigner that people in the Nordics are not seeing?
No, I don't think so. I don't think it's something that I see as a foreigner that people don't see from within. I think it's just the ability to perhaps be more vocal about it and be more comfortable with being more vocal about it. Because I think there's a lot of strong technical skills that exist within the Nordics, but sometimes the commercial skills are not as strong as, say, in London or the Valley or somewhere else like that. So there is a focus, and I believe it's the right focus to be heads down on your product and working on the product. But sometimes that means that the kind of more commercial or business development part gets left out, and I think that brand is part of that.
So I really want to talk about that. When we talk about the Nordic countries, one thing that seems to be missing is role models. So just to be clear, when we talk about role models in the ecosystem, these are the really critical players that make people say, hey, I could do that too, and I want to get involved, and that really grow the startup ecosystem. And one thing that the Nordics seem to have difficulty with is kind of marketing and promoting these role models. Would you guys agree?
When you're talking about role model, are you talking about community builders, or are you talking about
I'm talking
founders?
about the companies, the founders, the people that Neil is talking about, saying, hey, you're doing something really cool, let's talk about this.
I think that's the whole core of Global Startup Awards, basically. So Global Startup Awards began here in Denmark, and what we're trying to do is take these role models and bring them out in the world. So for example, this year we have an event in China where the winners from last year are going to China. But in reality, you should see the award show more as a vessel, as an excuse to bridge between countries and use it as a platform for marketing and for networking. So I think if we go out in the world with our role models, I think we can get a lot of marketing externally, but I think maybe as Nordic people, we are not so good at bragging about ourselves. As you mentioned, like the Jantelov and so forth, that's definitely also present, I think.
But I think we have quite a lot of good role models. I mean, mainly they're coming from Sweden. But I mean, when you talk about Spotify, when you talk about Klarna, when you talk about iZettle, I mean, it tells people something.
Yeah.
Skype.
It's world-famous brands.
Sorry?
Yeah, it's world-famous brands
Yeah.
also.
Yeah. World-famous brands that people still don't know are from the Nordics. I mean, that's the issue, right?
Maybe that's the issue, yeah.
I was with maybe I shouldn't say who. I was with a journalist last week from outside of Denmark, and they actually didn't know that Just Eat was Danish or Zendesk was Danish, and I thought we were at a point now where people knew that, but actually they don't. And I've become part of the insular bubble myself, where I used to kind of be on the outside, and I was shocked that I didn't know it, and that's why I started the Nordic Web, was because I was shocked at all these companies that come from the Nordics.
Yeah.
And I actually believed we are now in a position where we've been better at talking about that, and I do think we're better at it, but now I'm in the bubble, I'm now unaware that people still don't understand that those companies are from here. So I still don't think we're doing a great job at saying they originated from here or being proud of their success. I mean, you only have to look at when Spotify listed and they put up the Swiss flag and not the Swedish flag.
And also, the 3 companies you named are Swedish, so are we saying the purpose of better Nordic collaboration is that we all pretend to be Sweden?
He just mentioned Just Eat, at least.
Yeah. Swedish people, no. But
See, you can say that because you're not Danish, but you can't say that if you're Danish.
But actually, there are companies from the Nordics that are globally known brands, right? I mean, people know, for example, Nokia. So is this possible something that should be more involved in the startup ecosystem, is the role of the corporates in terms of how we connect with them as startups?
Well, I mean, IKEA is really representing the Nordic lifestyle as well. So I think it's easier to identify IKEA as something Nordic, probably.
Sweden again.
Sorry?
Always Sweden, Carla.
Always Sweden, I know, yeah. But
So I guess what I'm saying is, do you think that there is a role for corporates to play in promoting and supporting interconnectedness for the startup ecosystem?
I think so. I mean, sorry again, I'm going to talk about Sweden, but yeah, that's where I lived for the past 2 years. When I was there, we had those tech meetups called Stockholm Tech Meetup, which is the biggest tech meetup in Europe, and I found that they were very good at integrating the corporates. For instance, Volvo was going there a lot to talk about, you know, what their new service was, and it was not just self-promotion, but they were also there to, you know, make themselves available for mentoring, for instance, some startups. And here, what I see is that sometimes corporates are more seen as like, just give me the money, and then we'll do something with it, and thanks, bye. But I mean, we could really use them in the sense that they would feel like they could mentor and give something a bit more than just financial support. And of course, startups can learn from them. It's not just a financial support for us. I think it's a huge opportunity to learn from those big companies that can help startups scale.
And I also think the corporate has huge platform for entering markets. So if you have a collaboration with the big corporates, and it's a collaboration where they can help you go into new markets. If you take Microsoft for an example, they have access to clients all over the world. So if you have a good partnership with a company like Microsoft, they can help you enter new markets and access new clients. And they definitely also have a marketing machine with a lot of funds. So I think that the collaboration between corporates and startup is a natural evolution that's happening right now, and I think it's going to go much deeper.
So I'm in complete disagreement. I think corporates and startups is the most boring conversation that exists in the startup world. Like I really, I think it's way overplayed. But for me, it's more that I think on a community building level, it has to come from an individual rather than organization. So I'm even more extreme. So even disregarding corporates right now, even organizations who you could say are startup organizations, co-working spaces or whatever, I believe that it's really hard to separate your own business interests when you are collaborating between other similar businesses in different countries and stuff like that. And therefore, to kind of avoid that conflict, we should be looking at it from an individual level and like from a passion level, because I think the passion is the key to community building, not money or corporates or anything like that. But for me, I do it because I care. I don't do it because I'm trying to get the Nordic web out there. Of course, that happens as a side effect, but my core motivation is from a personal passion perspective, and I find it hard to kind of disengage from my organizational interest and my individual interest. So for me, it should be about the individual rather than anything else. But of course, I can accept that corporates do provide money, they do provide valuable things. I'm not denying that, but I think that in this community building perspective, it's not necessarily needed.
And I totally agree with Neil that it's a very boring conversation, and all this disruption and exponentiality and all that shit is like super tiring. But if I approach it from a business perspective, I see this as a unavoidable development, because there is a totally strong synergy between big corporations and, let's say, technology startups within a different niche, for example. And I think technology and how the world is evolving right now makes that unavoidable a good match for the future, because even the corporates are changing rapidly in the way that they work. So I think even the word startup is kind of, to me, sometimes a bit worn out, because in reality it's about making business and making innovation and making impact. And it doesn't necessarily only the startups that has a, how can you say, like the only one that has the possibility to do that. That's actually also the corporates. So I think we have to get out of that bubble a little bit and see that the world is changing super fast, and that's why the corporates also look towards the startups as well.
So you said that one of the benefits of corporates, besides giving money and mentorship, is that they're actually helping with the go-to-market strategy. But is this something that better ecosystem collaboration could also be helping with? I mean, how can we as an ecosystem come together to help startups reach some of those goals without having corporate involvement?
I mean, there's already government bodies that are helping startups scale. I'm thinking about Copenhagen Capacity. I think they have some programs where they kind of help them find partners abroad. So I mean, I mean, I think that startups can use those programs to scale.
But is this not going back to relying on the organization and not the individuals that, as you said, are driven here by passion for the community?
Well, I mean, I think that events like this are also helping, obviously, because I mean, that's pretty much grassroots, and there's a lot of opportunities for startups to meet people that they can collaborate with abroad as well.
Yeah, I think so. Like, again, thinking from an individual level, something that I would like to see happen, perhaps, and I know that they want to do this. There's a lot of Series A or Series B founders in the Nordics could perhaps help mentor the new ones and stuff like that. And I think that that's also community building. And if we can provide a structure where we can do that across the countries as well, then obviously we give ourselves a larger pool of those individuals as well. And because I think there's some great examples. I mean, just to use Norway, there's Johan Brand, there's Sharten Sledder, they're giving back in Norway. They're really, really close to the new companies coming through. Every new company I speak to in Norway tells me they've already spoken to them. So they are giving back, and they're community building, even though they're full-time entrepreneurs as well, right? So for me, I think we could perhaps do more around that and structure that in a way so then we can drive it from within the community.
So what do you see as a structure that can energize individuals that are in the community to really contribute more at a community building level to build this type of impact?
I think if it was possible somehow to build a really united brand that is like one point of entrance. For example, if you have the Danish marketing towards the Western world in tourism, you have Visit Denmark. I think and everyone is trying to build that, but if you could really build one brand that's like one point of entrance to the Nordic, that would be extremely powerful. But it's always complicated to make all these community builders work together because, as Neil said, they work from passion, and they work in isolated silos. And reality is that between the Nordic countries, there are not that much collaboration. It's only around the events, and you meet, and we have some projects from the Rising North, which is a fund that supports marketing of the Nordic and development in the Nordic ecosystem. But in reality, on the daily level, it might not be there so much. But if you had one point of entrance that you could show the world, so when I'm in China, I would say, yeah, you just go to this website. You'll find everything you need to know about the Nordic. And of course, this website has to be supported by some kind of organization. But who's going to fund it? And how do we connect everything under that? That's something I don't have an answer to.
Yeah. But I think it's the incentives is the issue, right? And that's why I come back to passion, because that has to be the underlying incentive, because I don't think you can be aligned on anything else, because you will always have your business best interest at heart otherwise, because it's hard to incentivize everyone in a fair way to kind of build together. And that's why I believe it has to be passion, because I don't think you can incentivize otherwise.
And I totally agree. It has to be built by passion, but you need some kind of framework that makes it sustainable, because passion dies with people. So the passion has to live in the brand itself, and it cannot be carried by individuals, because when the individuals get 2 more kids or move to another country or whatever, it dies out. So you have to build something that is bigger than the individual. It has to be like a brand and kind of a movement or something like that.
I want to pivot a little bit, because we got a question on Slido that I actually think, I'm not sure all of us agree with, which is that, do you think the Nordic startup ecosystem has the potential to become a new Silicon Valley because they share a common goal and have similar values? So to start with, do we believe that we share similar values with Silicon Valley as the Nordics?
I don't think we do. I don't think we necessarily do. I think the most dangerous thing is to just compare us to Silicon Valley, right? That I believe that Silicon Valley should be Silicon Valley, and the Nordics should be the best Nordics we can be. I mean, of course, there's a common goal to some respect that we want to build a thriving ecosystem, but that doesn't necessarily mean we want to do it the same way. So, of course, we want to have billion-dollar companies come from here, and for everyone to look at us and see that we're doing some great stuff. But I don't necessarily think that we have to do it the same way or share similar values. But most importantly, I don't think we should be the new Silicon Valley. We should just be the best Nordics ecosystem we can be.
I totally agree. I think that it's a bit of a myth to always try to compare another ecosystem to Silicon Valley. There's not going to be a second one. The closest thing to Silicon Valley right now is happening in China, in Shenzhen, so it's already there. But I mean, if we want to talk about the Nordics, I think that, as Neil said, we need to create our own model, and we have completely, from what I see, different values, and it's not bad. It's just different, and we should just play on those values. And as you said, I mean, the Nordics is a strong brand already, and I mean, I see a lot of collaborations with Silicon Valley, for instance, between the Nordics and Silicon Valley. So I think that that's already a good sign. But I mean, I don't think we should compare, and I think we should just push for what we have here. Going back to the motivation, I think that something quite different from Denmark to Sweden again is that in Sweden they really were good at like getting someone from the US to build this ecosystem and like putting money on the table and deciding that yes, we were going to be this strong ecosystem that Sweden is right now for startups. And I think that what we lack in Denmark is a bit this kind of like push. Because as Neil said, like it's coming from individuals, but I think it should come a bit more from the top, and the top should support a bit more what's happening at the bottom.
So do you think the biggest players here are doing enough to support the ecosystem?
Sorry?
When you say the players at the top, are you saying that the big players here are not doing enough to support the ecosystem?
I'm not going to have friends here now. I think that there could be a little bit more that's done regarding, yes, supporting the grassroots movements and the people that are trying to build something here.
Do you think they're incentivized to do that?
Those big players, I mean, they should be incentivized by themselves, right? No one is going to incentivize them. They should decide, okay, yes, Denmark is gonna be this brilliant ecosystem, and then put money on the table to have some like grants for conferences or for projects or even for startups that are going into maybe a risky business. And then once something is gonna pop up, like Stockholm Tech Meetup, then other meetups are gonna start, and through those meetings and different reunions of people that want to build something is gonna come out of it. A good example of that is Tech Festival, right? Tech Festival, there's a lot of those co-created meetups that are really successful that are actually giving birth to those yearly and more like monthly meetups. For instance, I think it was Women Who Code or Women in UI UX, something like that, that came out of Tech Festival because they met there and because they had this incentive to continue afterwards.
But are we not getting a little caught up in events as the main structural incentive to really motivate people to be contributors to this ecosystem? So there's another question here about the opportunity of a strong public sector. So we've talked about collaborating with corporates and why or not that's good, but there's also the very necessary aspect of collaborating with the public sector, which is significantly larger in comparison to Silicon Valley and plays a different role here. So how do you see that as something that we can utilize across Nordically to help build our brand and grow the ecosystem?
I mean, we have the Nordic Minister Council that in theory should be a really strong, organ that could help do this, and you have the Nordic Innovation under that council. But that's kind of the only political unique collaboration that we have in the Nordic. If you go to Southeast Asia, they also have a council called ASEAN, which is all the ASEAN countries, which is 10 countries in Southeast Asia. They are also not doing any like real stuff across the borders. But I think we all try to get Nordic innovation involved in many things, and isn't that the only real place that is unifying the Nordic as a government organ?
Yeah, I'm a little less harder on the public sector than I was the corporates, but I would say that we have a great example in the Nordics of what a strong public sector support can do. I mean, Finland has Slush. Definitely. It has Aalto's Fellows. It has so many kind of grassroots initiatives which have really benefited from close collaboration with the public sector, monetary support and other support, and there's no denying that has had a strong impact on Finland as an ecosystem. So as much as I am sometimes skeptical about public sector involvement as well, just as I am on a corporate level, we have an amazing example within the Nordics of how that can work well. Whether that can work on a Nordic level, I don't know, because then everyone, again, has their own individual budgets and will fight for their own resource, right? I don't know about that, but I think Finland is a great example of strong public sector support for an ecosystem.
So one thing that Slush has embraced is actually the hashtag NordicMade, which I know you're all familiar with. So for those who aren't, Nordic Made is essentially a hashtag that was created by community builders to try to co-brand the Nordic ecosystem so that when we're talking about Nordic startups, we could have one concrete way to promote them. And we've been talking about this for, I guess, 5 to 6 years. And I'd like to see, from this group especially, do you see this as something that will continue and help us, or is this something that's maybe not been so successful?
Isn't again back to the discussion that it needs to be rooted in something sustainable that have to be financially sustainable, that can run over a period of time and be kind of rooted somewhere. See, we definitely use the hashtag Nordic Made, and I think it's it's a really good idea, but in reality, maybe it's not. It's more like still like grassroots. You know, we need some kind of structure and organization and money. So, the money can be
what
public.
is a sustainable way to bring attention to the community?
Come again?
What is a sustainable way to bring attention to the community?
No, sustainability, I'm talking about if you are putting your hands on this project, how do you make sure that it can sustain for a long time? So it becomes more like a professional organization that can run. So if you want to build something around the Nordic Made, it should be rooted in some kind of sustainable structure, organization, or it could be a company.
Yeah. I think Nordic Made is like exemplifies all of the worst things we're talking about and all of the best things we're talking about here.
Exactly.
Like I really think that it's been the victim of some of the issues that we've raised, but it's also done a good job. Like I really feel like everyone has got behind it. It has brought people together. Maybe it hasn't been as tangible as we would like at times, but it has brought people, like I think the best thing that's happened about Nordic Made is it's meant that the people who are involved in it talk way more regularly than they used to. So there is like less tangible benefits from it, and we are more joined up. Maybe we haven't hit the tangible objectives that we wanted to because we've been victims of the issues that we talked about, poor incentives, everyone looking at their own organization. But ultimately, I think it's been a good thing, and I think that it's provided, maybe this is just the first iteration of what we will eventually come up with.
So maybe it can evolve over time and become more structured.
And by the way, if you're on your phone tweeting about the event, please use the hashtag NordicMade and join the conversation and keep it going, because it's not just for community builders, it's a way that we can try to get everybody involved that's tangible. I also like to ask another question that is from the audience, which is that we kind of covered this in the beginning, but at the end of the day, each country wants their own spotlight. So what is the purpose, again, of collaborating Nordically? How do we make it something that everyone can get involved with at a Nordic level and not be just focused on becoming Sweden?
I don't know. I think you can look at it from two perspectives. Although I kind of said you can look at me as a neutral, I live here, my family are Danish. I definitely have a soft spot for the Danish ecosystem more than I have any of the others. I can admit to that, and I have that, but I still come at it from a Nordic perspective. So I think that, of course, you always have your kind of own interests, and perhaps you always favor your own country over the Nordics as a whole. But I don't think that it's a zero-sum game. I think you can look at it from the point of what we're doing here can help on a Nordic level, and subsequently that will circle back around and help us what we're doing in this country. So I think you can come at it from both angles.
And I think there's different levels of this. And again, when we travel far away, maybe it's nice to be part of a Nordic brand, but maybe on a local level it's nice to be Danish.
Yeah.
So I really think that the Nordic brand is something we can use when we go to Asia, for example. That is really powerful instead of just being from Denmark. So I don't think everything is black and white. You have to think about the context and, the context.
Yeah.
Do you think there is any value as community builders on only focusing on the country brand as opposed to trying to just be Nordic from the beginning?
I think you need that initially, right? You need to build up the community in your own ecosystem before you can potentially contribute or be part of a more unified one. But I think we're now at a level where that exists in every single country. So yes, I do think that was probably needed at the beginning, and that's probably why this Nordic conversation didn't happen properly until 5 years ago, because it was still so immature within their own individual ecosystems. But now they're all at a level where they can actually start to look at being joined up. So I think it's a maturity thing, and now it makes sense to be more joined up.
Mm-hmm. So again, this is going into more of our audience questions, which is basically, what do you see as the unique or unifying characteristics within the startup ecosystem in the Nordics? We've talked about the high trust brand. We've talked a little bit about the heavy involvement of the public sector, for better or for worse. We've talked about maybe shying away from corporates in some of the countries, but what else do you see as something that's essentially unique for the Nordics?
I would say one positive thing is that Nordic startups, they have to think globally from the beginning. I think that's something that unifies, the common story. And I think, again, that unifies the need to have a Nordic brand when you go out. So most Nordic startups, they know that they have to go into new market if they want to be successful, because the local markets are simply just not so big.
So it seems to me that one of the things that we've been focusing on a lot is that how other countries see us when we go out as the Nordics is that we're so small, we're not differentiated. So we're essentially already under the Nordic brand de facto. So again, what parts of this Nordic brand do you think are something that we should be leveraging more to get a greater impact globally?
Yeah, I think that we already do a good job of talking about per capita we're good at this, per capita we have this many startups, per capita we raise this much investment per head. Yeah, of course, when it's a small country that's always going to be the case. I say fuck per capita. There's been 10 unicorns from the Nordics in the last 10 years, right? Compare that to anywhere else. Look at the VC realized returns in the Nordics compared to anywhere else in Europe in the last couple of years. King, Avito, Spotify, Klarna. I mean, forget per capita. We're doing better than most places in Europe or the world anyway, and we are only 26 million people, but that's a secondary fact, in my opinion. So I think we should be a bit more bold in how we position ourselves and really screw the per capita argument and just talk about what we have actually done, because that's impressive enough to stand alone.
Well said.
Yeah, I think there's broad agreement with that. But you again said, is this a warning? You again said that one of the things is to be more bold, and I think that another identifying characteristic of the Nordics is that, honestly, they're not very bold, right? We've talked a little bit about Jentala. We've talked about how it takes foreigners to come and point out and say, hey, this person's doing something cool. How can we actually help the ecosystem be more bold and share this aspect? Again, I think it depends where we're talking about in the Nordics. Now we talk about kind of differentiating the different Nordic countries, but again, if you look at Sweden, I think they're pretty bold in what they're doing. At least putting themselves out there and going to those US conferences, bringing their startups there as a delegation, and of course the whole ecosystem in the Nordics is benefiting from this because they see Sweden, they see the Nordics, so that's good. But I mean, Sweden, I think for me is leading the way, and maybe we should be following their steps in just being out there and organizing more of those events. And so then, Carla, what's the incentive for Sweden to collaborate with the other Nordics if they're doing so great? But that's the thing. I think that they're a bit more reluctant in collaborating because they kind of don't need us, and that's why we need to be out there to fight for our ecosystem as well. So does Sweden need the other Nordics? Are we just going to be a Nordics without Sweden?
Well, we're just piggybacking now.
Yeah. Now we're just piggybacking on Klarna, Izettle, and Spotify, right?
Maybe we could ask the Swedes.
There are
There's
some
one
Swedes
of
in
them
the
out
room.
there. Yeah. Cool. Well, if I just wrap up,
Sure.
Add a twist, which is communities are made of individuals. There are 4 individuals on stage. You talked about passion. I know for a fact that I've just met Carla, but I know that 3 of them are super passionate. You seem pretty passionate. They are happy to share. So, you have met them now. You can walk up to them and you can say hello to them. And you can share your passion. You can ask your questions. Anyone taking off right after this? Are you open to talking with people out there?
Of course.
Boom.
Of course.
That's cool. Please. Well, give a large round of applause, please, to our panel. Thank you very much.